Did Donald Trump just throw the pro-life movement under the bus?
DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that
I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake.
It sure felt like it. These comments were ripped by many, with some groups even considering removing support for the former president. Wait, wasn't this a part of a longer interview? Indeed, the clip came from a long-form interview with NBC's Meet the Press, and after watching it, we think it might not actually be that simple. Actually, we think it could be one of the most interesting abortion answers we have ever seen. Also, it's a hot strike summer with United Auto Workers launching a major holdout in factories in Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio. Apple's Mother Earth commercial induces maximum cringe, with nature taking the form of a crotchety black woman.
Mother Nature.
What?
And Erica recalls what would have been the most controversial order of nuns of all time. All this and more on this week's edition of the Loopcast. God bless everyone. Welcome back to the Loopcast. I am joined today with my favorite co-hosts, Erica and Josh. Josh is at a super secret location as well, doing some meetings that are way above my head. Josh, you enjoying that hotel room there?
I am, but you just said Erica's your favorite co-host, and then you just said, and
I
Josh.
heard that. Singular.
So, I mean...
Go for it, Pogo.
Josh is way too perceptive for me to do slight disses. No, Josh is of course a favorite.
You know what?
As well.
Actually, don't worry, Tom. Erica's my favorite co-host too. So
Yeah.
I think she's America's favorite co-host as well. So
okay,
we don't need to have an argument over this one. But what's funny about this little banter back and forth there is the top story we're talking about today was actually a source of some intense debate. Not going to name names, but between me and Josh. And I may have to eat a little bit of crow here because I think my opinion changed after seeing more context. However, I'm happy to take one side of this debate. The top story, of course, is Trump over the weekend took part of some interviews. One was with Megyn Kelly. One was with MSNBC. Or sorry, it was NBC, right?
NBC, yep.
Yeah,
Meet the Press.
It was NBC Meet the Press, right?
Mm-hmm. He returns.
So Meet the Press is known for being, very hospitable to Trump. That, of course, is sarcastic. They love to put him in corners and make him not look great, but he takes him on anyway. And so the clip that was put out, it was actually put out by DeSantis' War Room, which is important to say, but it was a clip of a larger interview in which Donald Trump attacked the presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis, saying that his 6-week abortion ban was a terrible idea, quote unquote. And so a lot of people latched on to this terrible idea as an attack on the pro-life movement. Many pro-lifers, specifically Lila Rose being the most prominent, really attacked this, saying, hey, don't take the pro-life movement for granted. You need to be our champion, basically, as he was his first term, but second term.
Well, she went a little further, I think, right? I mean, she said it was unacceptable.
Unacceptable. And a lot of people held that sentiment, and I honestly was fired up as well. I don't like... I come into this with the bias of being pro-life, and so any attacks on being less pro-life frustrate me. And I think it frustrated a lot of other people. But there was some context to this. Once you listen to the full interview, you see that it's a part of a larger argument about how do we make everyone happy in terms of when do we draw a line for abortions. It actually was a much more interesting discussion. The discussion was, okay, people want are you going to commit to this ban? Are you going to commit to this ban? And then Trump, of course, shoots back, well, there's Democrats that want to basically have post-birth abortions available, infanticide, but up until the last minute. So I can't remember the months, 9 months, 8 months, 7 months. And then of course the host was arguing back and forth. No one wants that. No one wants that, which hate to break it to you guys. Yes, the Women's Health Protection Act included protections for abortion up to the 9th month and partial birth. So that's a lie. It's just a very obvious lie that he's having to fight on.
Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, several states have
New York, right.
abortion. All
right. So that's just a lie.
Yeah,
it's just a lie, and Trump was calling it out as a lie. So the final point of what Trump was trying to accomplish in this interview was that he wants to get to a point where we can move the ball forward. The ball forward being that we are no longer going to have abortions in the 7th, 8th, 9th month of pregnancy because 92% of people don't want this anyway. Obviously, this isn't the European model. That was the point he was trying to get across. And of course, that's tough when you're on Meet the Press, but that was the true context. But seeing all the attacks, seeing the outrage, seeing Trump in this tough position, Josh, how did you interpret all of this on your gut reaction of seeing that first clip?
Well, you and I went back and forth on this several times the last few days. I mean, my first reaction to it was that Trump was being political. He's being, what they call it, astute or crafty or whatever. The reporter said, would you sign a ban on abortions at the 6th week? The heartbeat bill protects any child that you can when you can detect a heartbeat. Would you sign that? And he goes, I think that was a terrible mistake. In other words, he said it was a terrible mistake for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to sign it. Well, to me, obviously, he's doing that to try to attack his toughest primary opponent. But he's also trying to do it, I think, with an eye to the general election. He's got to convince the suburbanite voters who are a little bit not too sure about him, voted for him the first time in 2016, but then kind of moved away from him a little bit in 2020. Can he win some of them back? He needs to show, I'm not totally extreme. I'm going to come together with a bill that everyone's happy with, which, of course, I would say that's naive. There's not going to be a consensus on abortion. The two parties are polarized on this. But the whole point is he doesn't, you could say to him, that'll never happen because there won't be a consensus and you won't be able to get this grand compromise. And he would just say, oh, I could do it. He doesn't care whether it's possible. He just wants to show people that he would only support a bill that would be a broad consensus, that it wouldn't be only his base likes, like a heartbeat bill. That's what he's getting at. He wants to tell the suburbanites, I'm only going to support a bill that will have a broad consensus that would have the broad support of like 70 or 80% of the American people. Now, that's, I think, the impetus behind all this strategy on this. He knows that if he goes into a general election campaign and they say, well, you're in favor of a heartbeat bill. No, now he can say, no, I think that's a mistake. I want something that's a little bit more of a consensus. So that's kind of the whole point of why he's doing that. Now, a lot of pro-lifers are like, why are you attacking DeSantis for this? We'll see. We'll see if it costs him some votes in Iowa or not. But I just think it's
I think it might have.
Triangulate. That was the whole thing that Bill Clinton was really good at. Like, I'm going to try to show and by the way, whether or not you think this is crafty or good, what someone needs to do to get elected or not, I'm just explaining his rationale here. I'm not saying I endorse it. But Politico ran a story where it said the Biden world fears Trump may muddy the waters on abortion because they know, like, you look at Donald Trump, he's a transactional candidate. Nobody thinks in his deepest heart of hearts, oh, he just loves the pro-life issue so much. He believes it. He's been that way for 50 years. No. He looks at it like, can I get elected?
I think there's people that do.
I understand. But for the most part, he's able to sell this issue, I think, in a way that might muddy the waters where the suburbanites
It is out of the box. To his credit, it's different than how it's been talked about by both sides for as long as I can remember.
Like that's what Bill Clinton did in the 90s. He would isolate a left-wing policy, or someone like Sister Souljah and say, that's too radical. I'm against that. And so he would attack someone on the far left of his side to make him sound like he's in the middle. Was it a successful strategy? Yeah. Bill Clinton got elected twice.
It's true.
Yeah, and I think for me, the most important thing with this whole exchange with Kristen Welker on NBC, the important thing to do is to go and, like Tom was saying, watch the whole thing. And so I actually wanted to lean into that a little bit, Tom. And you mentioned at the beginning that from the time the soundbite comes out of like condemning Ron DeSantis in the 6-week heartbeat bill, which everyone on this call, I mean, any abortion at any stage is the murder of an innocent human life. Like we are totally 100% agreed on that. But I want to hear more about Pogo, like what changed for you when you start listening. And I'm gonna post the whole thing in the show notes. So everyone who's only seen the soundbite, I would encourage you to take the 8 minutes, go watch. It starts at 24 minutes into the interview. It's really worth it because we talk a lot on this show about politics and the art of the possible, that if you actually want to affect change, it's very likely that we're going to be looking at a rematch of 2020 at this point, unless something drastic changes and Trump isn't the nominee. We are probably looking at, you're going to have to vote for Biden or Trump. And so anyway, that being said, okay. I want to hear about Pogo. Like what changed for you watching the whole 8 minutes versus the 6 seconds soundbite?
So it's multi-layered. I think that it was a little bit of a powder keg for me because I've actually just personally been frustrated. Obviously, this show is very public. We get a lot of feedback. So I did an interview with Steve Cortez, which if you haven't listened to it, it's the one right before this. He is a spokesperson for the Never Back Down PAC for Ron DeSantis. Former Trump world guy. He worked on both campaigns, viciously smeared as a traitor now for going over to DeSantis.
He still lost Trump, though.
Yeah, he doesn't trash him at all. Yeah.
He's very classy. He did not trash Trump. Talked about some of their accomplishments they had together. He was very comfortable talking about him. The same could not be said from the other side. And I think that's actually one of my frustrations with Trump is how he treats people that worked with him and did well with him. That being said, I put a very, very, very massive disclaimer right away in the article saying, hey, we had the opportunity to speak to someone inside the DeSantis campaign who wanted to make the case in good faith to the LOOPcast audience. And I was appreciative of him taking the time to do that and speak directly to you guys. I got to ask questions that were very meaningful. We're talking about FBI. We're talking about things that matter to Catholics, pro-life protesters, all that. And I was just frustrated with a lot of the response to that interview was, oh my gosh, you're pro-DeSantis. You're bought and paid for, yada, yada, yada.
The comments were nasty. I mean, it got kind of nasty on there.
And I am contrarian by nature. If you haven't noticed, was how I market the show sometimes or make the titles. Like, I am not afraid of controversy. I like getting in the mix. I thought the best way to bring this to you guys would be to go speak to someone inside that campaign. We are now searching for someone within the Trump campaign to speak to you guys. But the accusations that I'm a traitor or I'm bought and paid for are first off ridiculous. I think it's been frustrating for me recently to be in this politics media realm and just to see people make snap judgments, which, to be fair, I watched that clip and I was very frustrated myself. But I think I watched the clip. I thought it was dumb for him to attack DeSantis on the heartbeat bill, being pro-life, being Catholic. I think that's monumental. It saved a lot of lives in Florida. And so when there was criticism of Trump over attacking DeSantis on that, I think that it frustrates me that people are not able to handle moderate criticism of Donald Trump. And so I voiced that when we were talking about, okay, how do we come out and talk about this as an organization, as Catholic Vote? People are like, we don't want to touch it. We don't want to anger people that are super pro-Trump. And I was like, for me, I'm like, are you serious? We're not gonna give a mild criticism of he shouldn't do this. And then I think one of the things that I was told by a writer here was, well, Trump, he's freewheeling and he says some things that he doesn't mean or doesn't follow through on. And that was the real thing that made me upset because I was like, well, apply that standard to literally anyone else. That would never fly. Are you serious? Like, people say things they don't mean, so therefore we shouldn't criticize them when they say something dumb. I was like, if DeSantis would have said something, we would have criticized him. If Nikki Haley would have said something, we would have criticized her. Like,
well, and the thing is,
we criticize all these people.
When Nikki Haley did go after fellow Republican candidates last debate, I did attack her for that because she was saying the Senate will never pass a 15-week ban, so why are you wasting your time? And I'm like, no, just because even if the Senate never does, you need to stake out a position and tell people what you stand for. Because if you don't say what you stand for, the other side is going to try to define you in a way that, that's all over the place and doesn't help you. So you got to put a flag down and say, this is what I stand for. Now, with regards to, the whole thing about Trump and DeSantis, we put that article out and about Trump and what he said about the heartbeat bill. And we had a lot of people just coming in with these comments, just so angry. I'm canceling my donations. You're attacking DeSantis. It's like, well, to me, it's hilarious because, by the way, if you look at my personal view of the candidates, I was like pro-DeSantis, and now kind of more pro-Trump, and I go back and forth. And it's like, so people are like, well, you're for this, you're for that. I mean, you got to get thick skin, you got to laugh it off, you got to move on. But yeah. The fact is, what we're going to do is we're going to call a spade a spade. And so when Nikki Haley says something stupid on abortion, we're going to attack her for it. When Mike Pence, who I think was terrible on religious liberty when he was governor of Indiana, he says something great on life. Hey, that was an awesome answer, Mike. Thank you. And so when Trump here is trying to triangulate to try to help him win the general election, I'm going to call him out for that. I'm like, hey, you know what? You're just doing this as a way to try to show everyone that you're not too crazy, too radical. I mean, obviously, what's radical is the idea that you should kill children. That's what's radical.
Mm-hmm.
But
which he said repeatedly in the interview. He's like, the Democrats are the extremists here. And he pushed back multiple times in the interview. Yeah.
We at Catholic Vote, Brian, our president, Brian Birch, said pro-life Catholic voters helped deliver Trump, victory in 2016. And we won him a record number of votes in 2020. So we've been good. Trump is always something like people who are loyal. Pro-life Catholic voters were loyal to Trump. And so we expect him to have a second term, if he gets elected, that resembles his first. Because he gave us 3 great people on the Supreme Court, pro-life justices. He did a lot of executive orders that were not just good, but better than George W. Bush had done. And that's not necessarily an attack on Bush. It's just that after so many years, you're like, here's a way we can make this executive order even better. You learn more, And then personnel. He put so many great people in all these agencies, especially the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we expect...
Oh, like Fauci?
No, I mean like Roger
Ben Carson.
Fauci was over there.
Severino.
Fauci was over there.
I know, he's not even an
HSS. But he had
Roger
Roger
Severino. That's a big
Severino.
mistake, but...
He had Roger Severino in there, and just he did an outstanding job defending religious liberty for healthcare workers and a lot of other policies. And so, he says something like this, we're going to push back at him. We're not going to use kid gloves. We're going to call it like we see it. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes some people might kind of overreact. And at the end of the day, if you really distill what this argument was with the reporter, he was talking about a hypothetical situation. What would he do if a heartbeat bill landed on his desk as president? Would he sign it or veto it? And of course, I don't anticipate any time in the next 10 years any such bill passing Congress. And if it does, it'll only pass because you have over 60 people in the Senate. Then yeah, you sign it because America's changed.
Right.
If I could add for context as well, Steve Cortez definitely said the same thing about DeSantis. Like, DeSantis understands politics and the levers of power. There is basically a 0.01% chance that anything would reach the desk as president on the federal level in terms of a ban. It's just not how it's going to work politically in terms of getting the votes in the Senate. So it's the same position.
Here's my 2 cents on, because I'm talking a lot about like the political calculations here. And so actually I would give a lot of credit to Ron DeSantis, because if you think about it, as a presidential candidate, he's thinking about everything he's doing in Florida as governor. He's keeping an eye on running for president, right? And he, in Florida, we could never get any pro-life legislation passed. And so he finally got a bunch of pro-life justices on the Florida Supreme Court. And he passed a ban on abortions at the 15-week mark. And if he would have stayed there and not done anything else, would people have criticized him? And it would have been safer for him in the general running as presidential candidate. But here's where I applaud him. He just went ahead with it. And the legislature was game for it. And he passed a bill protecting babies at 6-week mark. So that might have actually hurt him, his chances as a candidate to become the Republican nominee in the general. But there's a lot more babies that are going to be alive in Florida because of it. So I applaud him for it. These are the calculations that all voters have to make. I'm not trying to, obviously, as Erica said, we all believe abortion is totally evil, totally immoral every time. But you have to make these calculations on what is possible and all this other stuff. I understand it's tough questions, but we're going to call it like we see it. And we're not afraid of people who are pro-Trump attack us or pro-DeSantis attack us. Listen, what we care about is the issues. We care about trying to make a culture of life. We care about, having policies that are centered on the family. And we might make mistakes here or there, but we're going to try to do our darndest to call it like we see it.
Yeah, and I think the way you're talking about it, Josh, it characterizes it so well and makes it really clear that, look, politics isn't our religion, that as Catholic voters, our faith comes first. And, the only person we worship is the person of Jesus Christ, right, and God. And I think where a lot of the sort of political loyalty that it evolves into almost messianic worship is you see it in cases like this NBC interview where, there's a sound clip that says one thing, but then you have a loyalty to the person of Trump as like, it's going to be the savior of America and the world. I mean, I was looking at some of some of our comments were like, I live in the United Kingdom. You must elect Trump and save the world, America. Like, okay, all right. Well, I mean, talk about illustrating how politics has become the secular religion as we lose our Christianity. Yeah. But when you approach politics from the way Josh is describing it as, look, we're going to measure everything against the ideal, against the actual, like, what we want to get done, the culture we want to build, then you avoid this sort of like personality cult that we've seen around the presidency in the last 20, 30 years, especially come up. So kudos to Josh. Yeah.
Shout out to both of you. You're giving me hope. I think that's a very well-rounded answer to a lot of this. I think what we talked about, I've talked to Erica a lot about this, and that I think that Donald Trump, there's almost this expectation that people owe him like a blood oath of some kind. Sorry.
Oh, we lost it. Mercer's leaving now. He's like, I'm done.
Josh is leaving to go make the blood oath to Trump. He leaves so I can say whatever I want.
That's very quick, Tom. Yeah.
It was housekeeping.
Oh. Do not disturb.
Yeah, so now that he's back from the blood oath, there's just a lot of people that I feel like there's this expectation we owe Trump a blood oath, and we owe him this because, I don't know, the election was stolen and he's the chosen one, yada, yada, yada. I think that Erica made the correct take in that, of course, our religion comes first. God, there's only one God, and it's not Trump. But I think that it's almost human nature for us to want to believe that the person that we elect is good or bad, and they are a good person or a bad person. So therefore, if you're on one side, Trump is a good person, Biden is a bad person. On the other side, Biden is a good person, the other person. It's like you need to mentally, that's somehow a phenomenon that just happens. And I think the proper way to look at politicians is understanding more realpolitik, what Josh was putting out. They're identifying headwinds and trends and electorates. They're trying to find ways to get enough votes to get themselves in power. And if you look at them with that context, a lot of their actions make a lot more sense. And you don't have to feel this kind of moral responsibility that, oh, I maybe didn't elect. Like, it doesn't bother me that if Trump's not a good person, which a lot of things have suggested maybe he doesn't have the highest morals, I'm okay with that because I'm looking at it from, okay, well, what promises can he get done in office that would benefit all of us?
I don't know if I'd say I'm okay with it. It's just that you take everything in context, I mean.
Well, Josh, I mean, like, think about, if we're thinking about all of the things Trump's done in his life, or all the things Biden's done in his life, like, right. It may very well be that neither of them are good people, but everyone had to make a decision in the last election. Mm-hmm. I made a decision not based on whether or not I think he's a good person. I made a decision based on what can he do for the country. And that's where I'm at.
No, I
politics.
understand. I'm just saying, like, it's not that the personal character flaws are irrelevant. We're not saying that.
Yeah,
I want to make sure people understand that. Right. We're not saying that. We're not excusing it. But let's say we take this as a given that Donald Trump is, got some serious moral flaws in his character. And let's say that his opponent was actually a very moral, upstanding person, like, just a nice guy, like super good neighbor. But he just happened, support abortion on demand and, mutilating children, like, wait a minute, how could someone who's so nice, like Jimmy Carter, was like, oh, he's such a nice guy. Yeah, well, he might be a nice guy, but if he, supports these horrendous policies. Now, I happen to think that Joe Biden himself not only supports horrendous policies, is just a morally
not a nice person
man as well. Yeah. So the idea that,
but he was marketed as a sweet old man.
I understand.
Good old Catholic boy. So,
but my point is, like, it's not that character doesn't matter. I still think character matters. I'm just saying that a man of decent character who believes in vicious policies that are extremely harmful and mutilate and kill people, then maybe he's not the best guy in the world anyway, even if he's a nice neighbor. And the best champion for what we're trying to push, trying to end this cycle of violence through abortion and trying to protect our children from being mutilated or targeted by the rainbow mafia. That guy might be kind of a crass guy. He might be the best guy to protect us, though. So, you have to take all things in context.
something that struck me in the interview too, at one point, she kept pushing back, saying like, okay, there's no such thing as late-term abortion. Nobody wants that, blah, blah, blah. And Trump came back and he said, look, during my presidency, I gave pro-lifers a seat at the table for the first time in 50 years. And he said multiple times, he was like, I want everyone to have a seat at the table. And that is so many leagues better than the Democrat option, which is we just have, there is no conversation, right? And while, like Josh was saying, when it comes to abortion, it is murder, bottom line. But I would rather have the guy who said, okay, I'd rather we all need to come to the table. I'm going to work for us to everyone has a voice, than the guy who says, there is no conversation at all. And so
now back to the primary end of things, when it comes to Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, we're going to talk about these candidates. We're going to talk in context. Like, for example, Mike Pence, really good on the pro-life issue, has probably 0% chance of winning the Republican nomination. So we bring that up in context. Like, even if he gave the best answers and pro-life thing is the thing you care about the most, I'm just going to give it to you straight. Guy's not going to be the nominee. Okay? Now, that being said, we're going to talk about all of these things, and we're going to discuss it frankly. And we might offend your sensibilities sometimes, but at the end of the day, we care about trying to advance the cause of life and all the other issues that we care a lot about, like parental rights and making sure kids
religious freedom
destroyed. Right? Yeah, religious freedom, all this stuff. We're going to talk about it. And you know what? If you're as Tom said, if you're a super fanboy or super fan girl of a certain candidate and you get miffed, like, listen, maybe you're looking at this the wrong way. Like, maybe you should understand that, like, these leaders are not your superheroes, okay? And we're going to do our best. We're going to hold them honest. And you know what? You want us holding them honest.
Although my favorite account probably of all time is Trump History, where they use AI-generated images to send Trump back in time.
It's very funny.
Major events, such as marching with Martin Luther King Jr. and talking to Julius Caesar.
Whoever does Trump History, if you're listening and you want to work for us, like, reach out, please.
I need a memer.
We need a meme lord.
Yeah, I need a meme lord, yeah. The nice part about this program, too, is, of course, I think everyone has a certain degree of ego, but, like, none of us live in D.C. None of us have fancy apartments on Fifth Ave or whatever. Like, we're truly, we all have kids. We're Catholic. We go to Mass on Sunday. I live in the Midwest. Josh lives in the Midwest. Erica's a little bit of a cultural elite.
A little bit. Connecticut. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we're just normal. Like, none of us are like, nothing that we don't have an ego when it comes to this, right? Like, we're just calling it as we see it. We're not influenced by, what someone in DC wants us to do, wants us to say. Like, we're about as close down the middle as we can be in terms of just being honest about what we see. And so we hope that these kind of conversations are enlightening and encourage you to have similar conversations with the people around you when it comes to politics. Because I actually know a lot of Catholics, actually precisely the point of this show, are uncomfortable engaging with politics because it does get so nasty and there are kind of morality things that come into it. But you can feel comfortable talking about, hey, look, Pence has great answers on life, but Trump's probably got the best chance of winning. That's an okay thing to say. Like, there's no one should pressure you into not being able to talk about a candidate or talk about issues all because, and Catholic lefties love doing this. Like, they just hate Trump so much. They would never he's like Voldemort to them. Like, they would never, they would never even bring up his name.
Is that
he's
a Harry Potter reference?
I personally wasn't allowed to watch that.
Cultural powder keg. Come on, Pogo.
Yeah, cultural powder keg. So I need to move on before I incriminate myself further, but I appreciate all you listening. I actually genuinely do appreciate a lot of your perspectives. I got a quick note from our friends at Edify. So, talking about media deception, everyone's favorite reporter around here, Mary Margaret Allahan. She was actually a guest on the show. Hopefully going to get her on again soon. She broke down 5 ways that the media deceives you. It was a really good interview. She, of course, is very impressive. But we talk a lot about media deception here. I think this is one of the best distillations of a lot of the major deception. So we're going to have the link in the show notes here. Go check that one out. She's awesome. Edify's awesome. One of my favorite ones of recent from the Edify crew. So next topic we're going to talk about here, we're going to talk about strikes. So strikes are kind of all the rage these days. It started out with the Screen Actors Guild, which I feel like no one really felt bad for because they're all kind of California people that write.
Here's
What?
where I surprise you.
Oh,
You felt bad for them.
I'm actually sympathetic to the SAG strike. Is that crazy?
yeah. Wow. Do tell. Elaborate, Josh.
I know they're all liberal and horrible human beings. No, I'm not all horrible.
okay.
I'm just teasing. But no,
We're popping off this morning.
I am actually sympathetic to the SAG strike, because the fact is, if it's just another one of those, we're not getting paid well and, all that stuff. And I just feel like, gosh, some of these guys must be paid so much. But, the actors get paid a lot, but the people who work on the scripts, people who work behind the scenes, that's kind of what they're talking about. And I'm sympathetic. I'm willing to listen. But the thing on this strike in particular, the reason why they're doing this is because they want protections against artificial intelligence, because AI is getting so good, and you can generate scripts, you can generate even, the images now where you see this, and you're like, at first you're like, this looks like a regular human being, and it's actually not a human. It's completely digitally created, and they could
Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, never aged.
Yeah, and so you can, that's like
Creepy.
using CGI, but like literally they would create somebody who doesn't even exist. Like,
well, you could write a script using ChatGPT as well.
Right? Yes, you can. So you can use artificial intelligence to create a script, and also to create the characters. And so their concern here is that you're going to lose that human element of the story. Like it's not going to be the same, and so actors are concerned about their likeness being used in ways they don't want. But also, there is something to that strike. They've got some points there. I think that are worth,
Yeah, it's not just a bunch of spoiled kids over in California.
Yeah, so
sure.
Yeah,
it's more nuanced. Mm-hmm.
All right, more nuanced with the SAG, but we have another strike, hot strike summer. We have United Auto Workers just officially went on strike, and it's kind of a unique one in some ways in the way that they're executing it. But I'd like to bring up, American Catholic social justice warriors, including Leo the 13th, have been very supportive of unions, workers' rights, the ideas of a just living wage, these kind of things. Like, they're almost frustrating because I feel like they're brought up to kind of bash another side, but in reality, these are a part of Catholic social teaching, and it's necessary. So when you acknowledge these type of strikes, you need to look at them through that lens. Like, is this a legitimate claim? Is what's going on actually necessary? And so some of the demands include a massive pay raise, 36% raise over, is it 4 years?
Over 4 years.
And then 32-hour work week and pensions. Erica, I know this is a little bit of a unique strike. You did a lot of the research. Why is this one kind of different in some ways?
Yeah, so it's really, given the scale and the level of coordination, this is with the United Auto Workers, the UAW is how we'll talk about it. It has a real potential to be a huge national gut check, like even more than SAG, which is mostly confined, to California, to some of the elite enclaves. We had 13,000 auto workers walked off the job last Friday in Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio. So right down the heart of the nation. This is still only a little under 10% of the UAW's 160,000 workers. So percentage-wise, it's smaller. But it's the first time in the union's history and that we've had simultaneous walkouts at all three automakers. We're talking General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, which is the European conglomerate that owns Chrysler, Jeep, Ram. The union boss, Sean Fain, whose name to me sounds like an Irish domestic terrorism cell, said, it's a battle of the working class against the rich, the haves versus the have-nots, the billionaire class against everybody else. So very elevated rhetoric there. But like you said, Tom, some of these demands the companies are coming back and saying this is just going to put us out of business. Like, we'll take it to Mexico, which some of them have already started doing, massive pay raises. And
32-hour work week's kind of wild.
Yeah, sort of the ongoing threat, though, that Sean Fain is holding over the big three, is that the intent is to keep the strikes going. And the idea is that they're going to continue to have these sort of, widespread walkouts without warning at all three companies. So the scale of it is really something that we haven't seen in really modern American history, and the potential for real damage. Obviously, this will affect any of those non-unionized workers will be massively affected. Any of those smaller manufacturers who supply the big three, they're going to be massively affected as well. So that's what we're looking at.
And the response from Trump and Biden was pretty different.
So Trump's going to go there, right, Mercer? I think we were talking about this before we started recording. He, of course, is characterizing this. The workers are the victims of Bidenomics, the administration regulations, and the rhetoric of the Biden administration that they're going to get rid of, the oil companies are going to get rid of gas-powered vehicles by 2032. And so Trump's like, EV. Look, you created these conditions, and he's going to go there and stand with the workers, which will be fun, versus Biden, who says, he blames the auto companies. He says, the CEOs make these hundreds of millions of dollars. The workers don't get any of the record profits that we've seen since COVID. And so, of course, that's his rhetoric. And the union, I think they're hoping that the Biden administration is going to just step in and engineer this sweet, sweet deal for them. Biden's known as a union guy. He's named union guys to his administration.
Union Joe.
Union Joe. And so it's really interesting. Something that I found out when I was doing the research here that I hadn't really realized, you'd mentioned strike summer. It really has become a culture of strikes. So the UAW walkout is the 17th strike this year in the U.S. that's involved over 2,000 workers.
You know why?
That's a lot of massive strikes. This just being the biggest and latest one.
The reason why, though? Inflation.
Mm-hmm.
We've had 15% inflation over the last 18, 20 months. And that's cutting into everyone's wages. And so your dollar isn't going as far as it was, precisely because we had, in the year 2020, printed out money that just flooded the economy. So, of course, the prices are going to go up for everything. And so you have these contracts where your wage is set they do usually these, like a 3-year or a 4-year contract where it goes up certain percent every year. Well, if you have inflation that's roasting at 15% or, per year, it might be 10 or whatever, then all of a sudden, you're not doing that well. And so they're like, this is crazy. We want more money. It's like, well, okay. And then this idea that corporations, they're greedy. I always love that. Greedy. They're greedy. They want to make money. They have CEOs who make a lot of money. That's always the case. There's not a single year where a company isn't going to want to make money. There isn't a single year where the CEO is going to be a pauper. They're always going to be making money. The question is, are you being paid fairly? And I think a lot of people, to Tom's point, aren't going to be very sympathetic to auto workers if they're like, we want a 32-hour week. Dude, I'd love to have every Friday off too. Is that what are we going to do this now? This is great. Sure, let's do this. But I think Trump's got a point where he says, pushing back at Biden, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, you're pushing all these regulations to try to make sure a certain percentage of the cars are going to be electronic vehicles. And that is going to increase the cost of the vehicle, and it's going to reduce the profits. And so I think that's putting pressure on the company on the price side, because electronic vehicles are more expensive. And so I think Trump's right to push back at it. A lot of these other Republican candidates they're like, oh, strike. Oh, well,
that's not even on their radar.
It's not on the radar, because they're like, oh, business must be right, and the union workers must be wrong. But Trump is trying to rally these workers and say, listen, the problem here is that they're forcing you to make 1/3 of every car an electric vehicle. And I'm never going to buy an EV for the next 10, 15 years. You can't. I live in a place where it snows 6 months a year. I'm not going to trust some battery. Give me a break.
Josh, you and me kind of grew up with Michigan. We've been around it. The United Auto Workers is one of the strongest, most powerful unions in the country. And then that obviously trickles down to other unions in Michigan when it comes to the teachers union. And these are people that, when you talk about the 32-hour work week, the big price increase, whether or not, we've talked about the same thing with teachers unions, their intention is not to represent anyone except the teachers, except the workers. They're going to try to negotiate the best possible deal. Their interests don't lie in. With education, it's worse because we're talking about kids.
No, I know.
They're educated. It doesn't lie with the kids, and it doesn't lie with the cars, to Trump's point, because with the regulations to get more electric vehicles, that's not really their concern. Their concern is, how do we get our workers paid? How do we get them taken care of? How do we get the best possible conditions? And they're so powerful now. That's a whole nother conversation about they're too powerful in a lot of ways. There was a time maybe in the 1800s where unions, of course, were necessary, and because workers were truly getting abused and in bad conditions and things like that. But at a certain point, when do we draw the line? Is this getting too crazy? And one thing that I wanted to bring up too is the big winner in all of this is another man who we have talked about frequently, Elon Musk and Tesla, because Tesla is not unionized, and they are definitely reaping the benefit toward the push towards electric vehicles in terms of government subsidies and whatever. So they're going to cash out on this, because if we shut down here.
The thing is with the UAW, the strike, if they do it too hard, then other auto manufacturers who don't have union, like Toyota, and they manufacture a lot of their cars in Tennessee, Alabama, Indiana, all these other companies, they're going to run into issues. Yeah. So the UAW's got to be careful about how they do this. They got to thread the needle a little bit.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation, but I think the way that Trump is thinking about it is different and probably productive.
It's pretty clever.
I have a segue now into, and we kind of cover this in different ways, but this is another example of it. So I don't know if anyone saw the Apple commercial.
Mother Nature.
Mother Nature was a crotchety black woman in this commercial, and it was very slickly produced. She came in, and they basically had to give a presentation to her as the representative of Mother Earth and make her happy, and she was quippy and coming back, and it was just a really bizarre. I think even people who are very pro-Apple were like, what are we doing here?
The assumption, of course, in the ad was that Mother Earth was, no matter what, going to be very disappointed, and you guys can't live up to what you're supposed to do. And Apple's like, actually, don't worry. We did better than expected. We polished that apple, Mother Earth. We love you. We're so good. We did better than expected. Like, oh, wow. So there's this whole ad where they're just patting themselves on the back. And
yeah, they didn't bring up the lithium batteries in Africa, but
they didn't mention
anyway.
Cobalt mining. Yeah, I was a little disappointed, but.
So, Erica, when we talked about this, you said it kind of struck you as interesting. It's about creating gods, and that's kind of their new god, but it's for whatever their end is. In this case, their end is to sell more iPhone.
Right.
It's not. So what's this? And there was another video that came up. It was the Free Press. You put me onto it.
Yeah.
Both kind of examples of you just have to go into it. The Free Press ad, connect them.
I think that these two videos really sort of encapsulate for me. They're like icons of our capitalist sort of.
And what was the second video? Sorry,
yeah, so the second video, this video is, I think, my favorite video of the month from the Free Press. And it's one of their journalists. He goes in, he was going to write it up, but it ended up being a really brilliant comic timing, awesome. So video editor props about he's going to go and infiltrate the Democratic Socialist Conference in this big city. And he goes in and he starts out by trying to interview people attending the Democratic Socialist Party. And he's saying things like, okay, so we're going to abolish capitalism. They're like, yeah, we're going to abolish capitalism. No more free economy. And then it cuts to somebody sucking on their Starbucks, iced latte. It's really great. But so then he starts to push on. He's like, okay, so where will I get my deli sandwich for lunch when capitalism's abolished? And they're like, well, you'll just go to the store and they'll give it to you. And so it goes on and on. Eventually, they kick him out for asking too many intelligent questions. So the Democratic Socialists who are like creating this utopia.
Not with the police, mind you.
No, just themselves.
Because they don't believe in the police. They made that very clear. We don't believe in the police, but this hotel has rules and you will get kicked out by security.
It's very authoritarian, I think he said. And so then he notices that just across the way in like the adjoining hotel, there's another conference. And then it cuts to like all these black women roller skating and having a fun time. And it turns out it was like the Black Women Entrepreneur Conference. So a bunch of capitalists bring him in and they explain to him why like the free market has been great for them. This one woman, she has 6 companies. She's written 13 memoirs and she's only 40, which who knows what's in those, but
the vibes were
really
high.
Interesting. But these people were energized. They were having fun. They were happy. And the contrast was awesome. It was a beautiful video. I'm going to link it. Everyone should go and watch it.
Well,
but Tom, you and I were talking. Go ahead, Josh.
I mean, the video, it was a beautiful contrast between those two. And like one guy at the Socialist Workers Convention or whatever is like, I imagine a future like Star Trek where there's no money and anything you could ever want. And it's like, okay, great. Well, why don't you go ahead and invent one of those replicators? You walk up to it and say, I want a ham sandwich, and it magically appears. But in the meantime, we're here in the real world where people are hungry and need to feed each other. But the Apple commercial, I think, is just a perfect epitome of, call it late stage republic. I mean, it's like this, we have this capitalist we have this capitalist regime that we have, but their heart is sort of falling in love with socialism, and they feel super guilty. And so that, the people who are, I don't know if I should shell out, $800 for the fanciest new iPhone. Capitalism's so bad anyway, I hate it. But Apple will say, don't worry, we hate capitalism too, kind of. And we love Mother Earth. And you can feel so good because if you buy this phone, we'll plant a tree or whatever. I mean, it's just like, it's all about like assuaging this guilt that people have in participating in it. So it just cracks me up. I mean, there's no conversation.
But the larger point, and all this hilarious, Erica, we're kind of talking about this, but the observation I had of the people at the socialist convention, which I think socialism, rightfully so in some ways, kind of gets talked about as this big, scary thing that's going to change the country. And in some ways it has. But the people at the socialism convention were weird, outcast, nerd, out of shape, wearing masks. Like, they weren't physically threatening or imposing.
And organized.
They were organized.
Right. I felt kind of actually sad for them because it just became obvious to me these are people that slipped through the cracks, didn't work in the traditional system.
Okay.
But what the biggest contrast to me was the person speaking at the socialism conference was a good-looking, well-spoken young person, which then led me to believe, I think about this in a lot of different ways. It's the people who are kind of like alphas or whatever. It's the same thing on the other side with Tony Robbins and some of those people. Like, they sell their course to become a high-value man. And if you do all these things, you're going to get all the girls and all the money, and you're going to make all this. And of course, they're taking advantage of people with low self-esteem. It's like they just choose their side. They're almost creating a religion in a way. I feel like that socialism conference, because you want people to feel like they have a purpose and that what they're doing matters. And these are people that have not been able to find that in society, which the end of all of this is you won't find it. You only find it in God.
Yeah, everyone has a God,
but they're creating secular religions. Yeah, exactly.
As Augustine said. And a lot of young people, especially, like what is Gen Z? I mean, they're born in a generation.
Josh, I'm a Gen Z.
Okay.
You said that like a slur.
But I'm saying is that's a generation where pretty much your then entire life has been in a post-Christian environment. Whereas Eric and I can still recall the last few vestige years where there's that Christian residue was still kind of there, and it's gone. And so we have a lot less institutions, and there's a lot less trust in institutions. And, people are looking for some sort of anchor, some sort of purpose. So, like, to me, like, if we ever get beyond this and recover Western civilization, like, put that Apple ad in the Louvre, because it's like such a timepiece for this era. It's so obvious, like, worshiping Mother Earth, and she's cranky and she's telling, she's scorning you, but like, no, don't worry, we're just fine, and it's just.
Yeah, and I think that like what came across in both the Apple and at the Democratic Socialist Convention was the overwhelming like feeling watching the Democratic Socialist young people was sort of this pity, right? Because we all want to feel like we're good people. We all want to do the right thing. Most people, like, not the sociopaths, obviously, but
no, it's human nature. It's human nature,
right? It's human nature. Yeah. Like, we want to feel like we're doing the right thing. We want to act, be like we're loving, we're kind, we're good people. And on the capitalist end of things, oh well, you can, I only buy Apple products because look, we're saving the planet, and so you feel like a good person and like you're doing homage to this thing that's bigger than you. Democratic socialists, like, oh, we're not downtrodden on the poor, and everyone's included, and everything's open and accepting. Like, that feels really good. But if you take 2 seconds and you play the long game, like you look at the long game and you see the contrast with these Black women entrepreneurs who are being innovative, they're inventing things, they're pulling themselves out of poverty, they're actually doing the work. And that, but it sounds better to say something like, well, we're just going to give the poor all this stuff. Anyway, it was a really, like I said, these two videos put together were just a great sort of cultural moment. Like Josh said, put them both in the Louvre, because that's how we'll understand the 2020s when we look back in 100 years.
pre-Twilight Zone, to Josh's point, as this is always kind of mind-blowing to people my age or younger, Fulton Sheen had the #1 show on television at one point, like a Catholic priest, that people listened to this.
And he wasn't building any
day.
bridges either. I mean, this was like a Catholic priest show where he was like, there is a hell, there is sin, and you need Jesus Christ. This is like... He wasn't pulling punches. He wasn't pussyfooting. No, he definitely was not pulling punches. And he had the most popular show on television. Like, could you imagine that today? A Catholic priest had the most popular show on television. Well, I mean, Mike Schmitz soon.
Yeah. Yeah, he won awards. He was on other shows. People treated him with respect. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to even go back to that time.
Back when the church took media seriously.
Right. Yeah. Go back and listen to some Fulton Sheen. Like, you can watch them. They're all on YouTube.
You know what?
He's an unbelievable speaker. Yeah.
People who, Catholics did not get heartburn when Fulton Sheen gave an interview. Just going to say that out loud.
For those that get the insider, you know what Josh is talking about.
That's right.
All right. So we're moving to the Twilight Zone now. Josh, what do you have?
Well, kind of another video in a sense. I just saw this. Jordan Peterson, I like him a lot. A lot of people find him pretty fascinating. Pretty smart guy, the Canadian psychologist.
I love his outfits. I mean, hello. Look at those suits.
Well, so he was attacking this, like, the atheistic scientist, a materialist view. He's like, atheists just assume that all of us can be these have this rational scientific method of looking at the world, and therefore everyone will be better off if we adopt this method. And Jordan Peterson's like, listen, to look at the world like a scientist takes a lot of effort, a lot of training, a lot of education to kind of adopt that way of seeing things. Like, that's not general audience. Like, and we have as many people who are higher educated as possible, and we're still light years from that. That's just not an attainable thing. He said, that's why I applaud Catholicism. It's a drama, and it's inclusive in the right sense of the word. Anyone can be a part of this drama, this story, and this understanding of the universe and the world. So he showed just a lot of deep respect for it. And I thought that was really, some people, maybe he's converting. Who knows? Maybe not. Who knows? Whatever. I'm not really bringing it up for that point. But my point is to bring it up is that to say the underlying assumption of our age is this rationalist, materialist, atheist view of looking at things. It's rational, it's scientific. And he's just like, give me a break. Like, and he didn't say this, but of course it's true. Like, in this super rational age where we've dispensed with established religion, we have more people into astrology, and all this other baloney. It's like
cult stuff,
so are we more rational than we were 40, 50 years ago?
I have a story about that, Josh. So
take it away.
My lovely wife and I went to Milwaukee, and we went to the art museum there, and specifically one of the most captivating parts of it was really awesome. Wow, huge collection, really awesome. But they did a good job of explaining in each place. They told you about the period where the art was from, and they gave some context as to why it was influential at the time and some of the artists, their backgrounds. And the Baroque period, for anyone familiar, I feel like Erica, good. We got some Baroque people in here.
I'm so broke I can't pay attention.
We made a lot of Baroque jokes for sure. But the Baroque period, at least in their description, was about how the Reformation was happening at the time, and Martin Luther had kind of shaken things up, and he was going around, basically got people church to church to destroy beautiful art because they were considered icons. And those artists at the time, this was around the time of the Gutenberg press, but most of the people that could only the people that could read were low. So people that either had an education as a priest or were very wealthy could read, but most people, the average person, probably couldn't even read at the time. And so what they did was they created beautiful art scenes from Bible passages or religious events. So some things that really struck me, saints' lives. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's a really breathtaking portrait of, is it St. Francis of Assisi with he has a hood on and he's holding a skull.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and St. Francis in ecstasy.
Yeah, and they were basically influencing the people because they couldn't read, but they could take in this art and people could tell stories about what was happening during in the Bible, inspiring people deepening their faith because they had to fight back as a lot of these were being destroyed by educating people through art. And because people understand art, they understand beauty, they understand story, they understand drama. So I experienced that in real time in Milwaukee. Go check out the Baroque period. It's sick,
no,
by the
the
way.
whole point of the Baroque art
is
it's this dramatic effect in art. Dramatic, it shows action. I love it. One of my favorites is, and I love it because I myself was a doubting Thomas. I left the faith for several years. I came back, and it's easy for me to see myself as a St. Thomas. Like you think he really he died and he rose again? Really? I'm not going to believe it until I see it with my own eyes, until I could feel him. I mean, that's the humility I have to say. Like there, but for the grace of God, go I. There's the idea that I would be like St. John and be so faithful and be at the cross. I know myself enough to know I probably wouldn't have been that guy. I might not be as bad as St. Peter. I might have been. I'm definitely like St. Thomas. Like, he's dead. He's dead. He's not coming back. You guys get over it. And people are like, no, Thomas, we saw him alive. He rose from the dead. And then finally Jesus comes to him and he grabs Thomas's hands and sticks it into his rib cage. And so there's this beautiful piece of art by Caravaggio where it's, that the incredulity of Thomas, where you see his hand touching the rib cage of Jesus. And I love it. I mean, to me, that brings it to life. And I think it's by far my favorite art. And if you'll notice in the Weekend Loop, I'll be honest, like 90% of the time, it's a piece of Baroque art because I love it. So if you don't like it,
Fired up
I
on
guess
art.
don't click the Saturday Loop.
All right, Erica.
All right,
Twilight
yeah,
Zone.
continuing the thoughtful theme this week rather than some crazy news story. I wanted to just highlight, this is probably my favorite reads moment of the fall so far. Here, Louise Perry in the October First Things issue has a phenomenal article called We Are Repaganizing. It's really a long, extended essay. And once in a while, you'll get these essays, especially in a journal like First Things, that just hits the nail over the head. We've highlighted Matthew Schmidt's How Gay Marriage Changed America back in 2022, which was just a sort of prophetic analysis of how we got to where we are, the role that Obergefell played in that. And Louise Perry here, I think she, this year, has really nailed where we're going. She's looking ahead to what's this cultural moment that we're in, and she calls it repaganization. And I just wanted to highlight, we've talked a lot about this on this show, actually. It's been very sort of meta LOOPcast episode, right? So she talks about the role that Christianity played in getting us here and what's happening now that we've lost our Christian culture. She likens Christianity, it's not so much to like watering a garden as it is, there's this pagan barbarian forest. You think of like old Germany or something, and Christianity made a clearing where you could have, civilization at a garden, and the forest is now encroaching back on this clearing. She says, and I was going to read a couple quotes here, tease it, you got to go read it. Built into the fabric of Christianity is a love for the weak that could not help but slowly and falteringly work against the strong. Christians were not unique in owning slaves, for instance, but they were unique in eventually banning slavery, something no other civilization has ever done before. And modern secular feminists, familiar only with The Handmaid's Tale, wholly underestimate the emancipatory effect that Christianity had on women. And Louise Perry makes the point. She says, now that we're losing Christianity, we're seeing the return of infanticide as her primary example. Canada right now is very seriously debating, quote unquote, a bill that would allow infanticide for infants, basically medical aid in dying for infants after birth. Slavery and the objectification.
Medical aid in dying is the worst euphemism I've heard in a long time.
Yeah, it even sounds like slavery. And she's like, look, if infanticide is again legalized first in Canada and then inevitably across the whole de-Christianized world, we will know for sure that Christianity has retreated back into the catacombs. Very powerful essay, especially coming from someone who herself is not a Christian. So I think, that lends a little bit more thoughtfulness in some ways, or just, weight to what she's saying. So it's very sobering, but it's a great articulation of what's going on right now. So go to First Things. It's on the website.
Just
October issue.
Remember, to have hope, because the thing is, I remember, I'm too old for you on this, Tom, but growing up in the 1980s, my grandfather said I should learn Russian. I should learn to speak Russian. I said, why? Well, we're all going to be speaking it someday, don't you think? I mean, the thought was the Soviet Union was going to be around for hundreds of years. And it wasn't even, 6 years later, the Soviet Union was no more. It was gone. And what in its replacement, it's some sort of mixed bag, but the international imperialist communism is dead. We have this now in China with the red dragon there. We have this hybrid Marxist, capitalist, fascist kind of ugly thing, and it's nasty. But the threat in our own country, as Erica's saying, is this repaganism, is the abandonment of faith. But things can turn around quickly. I think all of us Christians, St. Peter said, we have to have an explanation or a reason for the hope that lies within us. And if you were living in Poland in the 1980s, like the thought that you would be a free country just in a short time, that's amazing to think of, the change that can happen quickly. So God's still in the driver's seat on all this stuff. We believe that, and you gotta hope. We're called to be faithful and not necessarily successful, but let's try to turn the ship around if we can.
Yeah, so my Twilight Zone, speaking of Russia, the moon landing, definitely. Okay, yeah, no, we're not going to go into the moon landing on this episode.
Just stop.
So my real Twilight Zone actually is a conversation I had with Erica, not to put anyone on blast here, but there's a video that came out, and it's just, I've seen so many of these, and they're always so gross and unnatural, but it was two men that went and got a egg from a donor, and they had a baby through this egg, and they were just put him in front of a camera, or her, was talking about how cute their baby was and all the features that they had picked out, basically. Like, look at those eyes, look at this hair. We'd gone through hundreds of women and shortlisted some, and we wanted these qualities. And so it felt very transactional. Like they were looking at it like they could just make a baby in a machine and it would come back and it had all the cute qualities that they wanted. And just another one of those just so hard to watch. And I think obviously the Catholic vision for marriage and procreation makes a lot of sense. Yeah, they're talking about a human being. And then there's another story that came out where this guy was a sperm donor in his younger age and fathered, I think, 96 children, something like that. And started feeling a lot of guilt about that, wanted to have connection with a lot of these kids. And so he's traveling around, and there's, of course, tough relationships with the people that he gave the sperm to and had kids. And like, well, what is the relationship now? It's like, it's kind of their dad, not really. Obviously, just like a really bizarre place to be in. But Erica said that there was a debate about this before my time as well. And there was a potential group of nuns that were thinking about fathering children of sperm donors. Is this
mothering?
Correct? Like, this
mothering,
just blew my...
Yeah. Okay, get your gender straight there, Tom.
Of course.
No, yeah, so this was back in the early 2000s. It's so funny you picked that out. I did not expect that. Back in the early 2000s, we're talking about, all these frozen embryos, and there was a real debate going on. There were actually several young women who were considering founding a religious order where the women would, the nuns, would just impregnate themselves with these frozen embryos so that they could bring them to life and to baptism, get them to loving homes. And that would be, the whole vocation of these women would be to save these frozen human beings. And that was, again, like, Josh is like, I can't believe this was a conversation. Hey, I was in the early days of the John Paul II Institute. People were really wrestling with these questions. But again, like, that's sort of taking it too far to the other extreme of, now these women were going to basically commodify their own wombs, trying to save these babies. And it was just this bizarre conversation that...
I don't know if they're commodifying it. I would say what they're doing is they may authentically, truly be wanting the better for that person that's frozen as a tiny, tiny, tiny human being. I don't think it's commodification, but I think it's a misplaced attempt at charity, But that's a real debate. Like, no, because people may not realize this, but when you do in vitro fertilization, well, I can't say this. IVF is condemned by the church. It's immoral. But what happens in vitro fertilization is that usually you get like 6 or 7 embryos that are created, and you implant like maybe 1, 2, 3, whatever, hope that some survive, but then others are created that you have no intention of ever bringing to life, further to life in a womb. Once you just throw them in a freezer, and it's not, everything about it is undignified. I understand the plight of moms and dads who can't have any of their children on their own. I know people like this, but it's not the answer. But the people wrestle with this. Now you've got this freezer with 10,000 humans that are basically 6, 7 weeks old, or however, whatever stage of development they're at. What can you do? Should you bring them to life? Should you find them wombs? And there's no good answer. But
I have to know what happened with these nuns. That didn't end up happening?
No,
right?
the order was never founded. No, this was a conversation. Thank heavens.
Wow.
The church would not be approved at all.
Yeah, I didn't know when we talked about it. There was no resolution. So I'm like, did these nuns?
You wanted to know the end of the story.
Yeah, I was like, I'm locked in right now.
No,
like,
if it would have happened,
just a
you would
crazy
have heard
idea
about it by now.
No.
Bad idea. I mean, bless her heart, but no, bad idea.
But yeah, probably a bad idea. But I just thought even the concept was interesting, and I think if we could just wrap it all in a bow. Please stop commodifying human beings. It's disgusting, unnatural, and no one should do it. It's hard for me to watch every time. Like, people get on social media like, man, this is going to look so great when I brag about how I made this baby in a lab. Like, no, it doesn't. It just always comes off as terrible. Anyway, so that does it for this week's edition of the Loopcast Ways to Help the Program. Please comment Apple Podcasts specifically. We're at 356. So we're rolling up. We're moving towards 400. Got some great reviews on there. Either just throw us 5 stars, or you can write a personalized review, which we really appreciate. Spotify, you can rate there as well. If you want to email us, loopcast@catholicvote.org. I've been appreciating all the emails. We do want to have more mailbag content, so if you have questions for us, please email in for us to talk about. We'd love to discuss what you would like us to discuss. And so we end this, as always, with Our Lady of Guadalupe, St. Thomas More, St. Fidelis, pray for us, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Bye.